Welcome back to part 2 of this week's episode of Leading Our Own Way, featuring our special guests. Now let's dive right back into the conversation and continue exploring their incredible journey.
I'm quite an impatient person, and it's not growing as quick as I would like. I've got a really clear vision. I've got my goals. I know where I want to be, but I'm like, come on, when are we getting there? And everyone around me said, yeah, you just gotta, take your time. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think a lot of that comes down to what you see on social media and what you hear, people just talking about how successful they are, but you don't hear about, the years that they had to put in beforehand. Like some people can go years before they can pay themselves within a business, and you don't often hear that side of it. So then when you go to do a business, like when I tell my friends that I run my own business, oh, it must be great, you can work whatever you want. I'm like, I work more now than I did when I was in a corporate role, but you just don't see that side of it until you're in it.
Well, and that's what we want to do on the podcast. That's why you're here. This is why we need to dive deep into this. And I suppose that leads nicely on to the next question. I suppose what I want to know, and anyone that's going to go through that messy middle of wanting to, whether they're on the verge of starting a business or whether they've just started it, but they're doing what you just said there, they're impatient and they're not seeing anything. Let's go to the source of it. Let's go to the beginning of it. What inspired you to do and create Core Story?
Well, I'd be lying if I say I just woke up and I was just so inspired to start this business. What happened was I was pushed, and I look at it as the universe kind of giving me a little tap and just like, come on, Aleyx, it's time. So I went back to work in January after taking 6 months off after I had my second child. And I went back to a job that I, to be honest, wasn't really enjoying. I didn't really want to go back. But, just after you have a baby, sometimes it's just like, it's easier to go back to what you know. So I did. And within 2 weeks, I could tell I was going to be made redundant. You can just tell these things by, meetings and things like that. About 10% of the workforce had been made redundant. And I thought, okay, right. Okay, well, what does that mean? So I started to think, okay, well, should I start looking at jobs? So I started looking at jobs, and I was like, I just don't want to. So I was a brand manager, and I was like, oh, I just don't really want another job. And I was like, okay, well, what do I do? And I started thinking about, maybe I could run a business. And I was listening to Steve Bartlett's audiobook, love him. I was listening to his audiobook, and I was like, I reckon I could do this. I'm quite an impulsive person. And I was like, I reckon I could do this. So I had my whole plan of what I was doing before I even knew I was being made redundant. So the day my boss was flying in to have a meeting with me, I sat next to my colleague, and I'd already told him, I said, I think I'm going to be made redundant. He's like, no way. And so that day I sat down at my desk, and he said to me, oh, how are you feeling about today? I went, I am so excited. I was like, I'm going to be disappointed if I'm not made redundant. And he was like, he started laughing. He's like, you're so weird. So then, I went into the meeting, and I had my laptop in my hand, and she looked really nervous. I said, don't worry, I know what's happening. I've got a plan. I'm going to set up a business. I'm really excited. So I didn't wake up inspired to start a business, but because of the redundancy, it got me thinking, and it led me here. And I don't believe there's any coincidences, and I do believe that was the universe kind of putting me in the direction I needed to go in. And so my background's marketing. So originally I was like, oh, I could be a marketing consultant. So I was like thinking about all the things that I could do, and then I was like, right, what would be my brand name? And I knew it had to be around story for several reasons. I've always loved reading, as you can see in my background. I've wrote my own book, and I've always loved story ever since I was a little girl. And I also knew from my marketing background, any great campaign we had, any great video, any event, anything that we did that worked really well had a really good story behind it that brought people in. So it just came to me. I was like, oh, core story, get to the core of a business, yeah, that makes sense. And it's just grew from there. And for me, the purpose of it is I really want to, in a business sense, I really want to empower businesses to utilize story to market themselves. I think businesses can really grow very well if they tap into story and they do it well. But also on a personal level as well, I just want to inspire more people to start sharing their true stories, to form deeper connections with everyone around them, because it's something I shied away, and I know we'll go into it, it's something I shied away from for so long. And I always craved connection. I wasn't quite getting the connection I wanted. And as soon as I just started just being more open and share my true story, I've just connected with people on a much deeper level than I have the previous 34 years of my life. So I want to inspire other people to do that, and I do that through my public speaking.
Yeah, nice. I like that. I'm glad you drew. I'm glad you drew on that. What? So if you encourage other people to share their core stories for their businesses, what would be your core story for your business?
For my business,
Yeah,
that's a good question. I think
I
I
like good questions.
as I was saying to you, was it on the podcast or before? It's really funny because it's so hard to work on your own stuff. Like, you can work on everyone else's, but when it comes to your own,
Yeah.
it's really hard to do. But as a business, I am the business. And I think at the heart of the core story is my love of story and my background in journalism and then marketing, and kind of seeing firsthand what story can do for businesses, and want to be able to help other businesses do that would be probably the core story, but that's not very articulate. I promise I can do it better for a
But do
client.
you? I mean, no, that's beautiful, and I think you kind of already answered it before with the connection, and I know we're going to get into that. But
Yeah.
where, I suppose, do you share your core story? Do people ask for your core story in these meetings as well, like I did, I suppose?
Not really, no, but I do when it comes to public speaking at events, and workshops, I dive into some of it. It really just depends as well. It depends on the audience and what they're going for. Some people, especially in a business sense, some do want a bit more surface level, others do want to dive deep. So it really depends on the audience and what I do share. But it's more at workshops and events that I'll dive right into that core story. Otherwise, I just go into my background a little bit in terms of my professional background. Yeah.
Yeah, connection. Then you said that word, and I love connection because that's kind of how I try. I've always kind of lived my life through energy and connection with people, and it's worked for me, but it's worked against me for sure. I love to talk to people, as you can probably tell. I've been
Me too.
great. We'll get along. But I think I try and you brought up Stephen Bartlett, and he had a guest on his show, and I've forgotten the guest name, and I brought this up many other times, and I'm sure people who listen every week probably get very bored of me saying it. But I try and live the life of 4 C's, and he brought up about connection, and then he brought up about contribution, which I feel is my podcast, and the third C would be cope, so sleep, exercise, and mindfulness, and then the 4th C, cook, and that's where I changed my life also around my food because of a near life death experience that I went through, and started to study the brain. Stephen Bartlett's podcast is why I started to study the brain and the human biology. That's kind of, with the guest that he had on, it kind of motivated me to go down that road and to read some of the books that you can see. Well, all the books. I've not read them all. I'm going through them very slowly with the time I've got, but learning a lot nevertheless. But connection is the first one, and I think it's the first one for an obvious reason. We go back hundreds of thousands of years, and connection seems to working in schools. I feel like I can see connection getting further and further away, but it's something we seem to talk about a hell of a lot. Why is connection so important to you?
I think because I craved it. I craved it a lot in my childhood, and I didn't get it as much as I probably should have. And so I've only realized this year retrospectively, but I craved it my entire life because it was lacking in my childhood. And where story comes into that is when I wasn't getting the connection I wanted at home, I was actually getting it through books. So I would go to the library. There was like a little children's section in the library in our hometown. I would sit there on my own for hours. There was like a little beanbag in the corner, and I would just read. And that was like my sanctuary. I loved it. And then when things were chaotic at home, I would lock myself in my room and I would just read. And I was connected to the story. I was connected to the characters. I was connected to that world or another life. And then yeah, this year I've actually started to connect with people on a much deeper level through sharing my story. And I must say I actually feel connected with more the people that I've just met this year than some people that I've known for 20 years, because we've kind of connected on that more deeper level. So yeah, I think connections just everything really, because it kind of just, for me, it helps you feel like you can be you around with that other person, and you don't have to put up a facade, which I would say I probably have done for a lot of my life.
Yeah. So with those people that you've known for a long time, what would you say is lacking? What is the category of the lacking of connection versus what you are getting from the people you've only known a year, let's say?
With some of them, so don't get me wrong, I've got a few very close friends that know everything about me, and we are very connected. But with other people, I probably didn't feel I probably feel like I just couldn't tell them everything about me, and that's not on them, that's on me, and the context of my upbringing. Um, but because of that, I wasn't able to fully be myself and fully let my guard down. So then it would the relationship would feel quite surface level. And it's funny because I've always said I hate small talk, and my husband always laughs at me because, like, when he walks the dog, he'll speak to everyone in the street, and I'll like purposely not want to look at them because I don't like small talk, so I avoid it. And Tom's
Aleyx.
like, yeah, but you can't just go straight into a deep talk with someone. I'm like, but I want to. So I think the reason I couldn't was because I wasn't being open. It's like, well, if you can't really be open, then the other person is not going to be open. So, although that's what I was craving, I wasn't doing it for myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, see, I think, there's levels to this level. There's levels to the conversation of connection, because, you're the person I would hate walking down the street not looking at me. I'm like, just look at me and smile. God damn it. Right? Just connection. I'm not asking you to get into a
I
deep
do it now.
conversation.
I do it now.
But it's a good point, though. You do see so many people crossing the road to avoid connection. And I then think deeper about that. Like, what's going on in your life to want to avoid even just a smile? I'm not asking you to stop. Maybe that is a bit weird. But, there's many people I do talk to on a dog walk, and we get into these deep conversations. Sometimes the podcast comes up and they go, I've been listening. And I'm like, yes, I love it. And then we get into it. Did it tonight with somebody.
Yeah.
But I do see more and more. I mean, going to the supermarket as an example, even adults, as well as kids, they're all looking at one thing.
Yeah.
And am I doing it sometimes if I need to check what I need to get? Yeah, of course. And it could be that in the moment, but it just happens way too often for it not to be anything else. And I think, the layer of connection is gone. It worries me. But we could talk about that for ages, but going back to you and your childhood, you did say it was a bit chaotic. How was it chaotic in your home then?
Yeah. So I grew up in Scotland with my mum. So my mum and dad split up when I was 3. My dad lived in Bristol, and my mum did remarry and then and had my sister, and that marriage didn't work out. So it was just me, my mum, and my sister. sister. Because of, a few things that mum had gone through, she developed a drinking problem. And so my mum's an alcoholic. So I grew up, with a single alcoholic mother. And it was really tough because as a child you end up being the parent, and you're trying to parent the parent. And it's really hard because somebody that drinks all the time, they're erratic, it's chaotic, you don't know what you're walking into. And it's very hard at that. So the first time I realized she had a drinking problem, I was 10. And to go through that at that age, when it's just before puberty and you've not really got that parent, they're there but they're not really there. That's really tough when you're growing up and trying to navigate all those things. But the other layer to that is, anyone who is an alcoholic or knows an alcoholic will know that they are also very good at hiding it. So, yes, she would hide things around the house and try to hide things from us, but we would know. But she'd also not want other people to know. We grew up in a very small town in Scotland, so of course everyone knows everyone's business, but for the most part, we tried to hide it. And that's really hard as well, because I'd be going to school and, in my head, there would just be a sense of dread, and I'd be like, oh, what's going to happen tonight when I go home? What am I walking into? So all this is going on in my head, yet on the outside, I'm smiling, I'm putting my hand up in class, I'm playing with my friends, and I don't dare tell any of my friends, well, not at that age anyway, because there's so much shame. You're made to feel like you're like, oh, I'm weird. I live in a weird house. Couldn't possibly tell them. So you're hiding a lot at a young age, and that I definitely took that into my adulthood without even realizing it.
That must have been hard. How did you said you found out at 10 that you understood she had a drinking problem. How does a 10-year-old figure that out?
Yeah, so I didn't figure it out on my own. So and I still remember it. I remember the first moment. Very. There's a lot in my childhood that I don't remember. I think it's a way you'll probably know, but it's how the brain protects itself. So there's my childhood memories quite patchy, but this I do really remember vividly. I went down the stairs, and so she was passed out on the chair, and I remember like the phone was off the hook. I could hear the dial tone. That was the really old phones. I could hear the dial tone ringing out. My mum was a smoker, so there was still like a cigarette burning in the ashtray, and I was like, oh, this is just just a weird. I'm like, this doesn't usually happen. By the time I just put a blanket over her, I stuck the cigarette out, and I went back up to my bed. And the next day, so my gran lived in the same town, and my gran is like, my gran's like my gran was like my mum. And I remember saying to her, I said, oh, mummy was a bit weird last night, and I described it, and it was actually my gran that said, I think your mum drinks too much. So that's, my gran told me. I wasn't that smart to work out.
Wow. So your gran was clearly quite open with you then?
Yes. Yeah.
So going forward, did you understand the concept of drinking is bad, not just drinking, Coke or water or anything? Like you knew it was an issue?
Yes.
Yeah. So did your mum get support off your gran going forward? Did there any advice, or did the alcoholism last for a long time? Or does it still happen?
Yeah, so she still drinks. So it was and now you're testing my patchy memory, but yeah, my gran tried her best to support, but alcoholism it's very complex, and there's also different layers to it, because it was funny when I first told my husband, my now husband, when I first told him my mom was an alcoholic, he'd never had experience with an alcoholic. He's like, oh, so why doesn't she just not drink? And like that, he's not the first person I've heard to say that, because I guess if you don't have experience with it, you does logically, but why don't you just not drink? And it's not how addiction works.
How did that affect you going into your teenage years?
Oh, I think a lot. So I I used to be in the, I'm going to use inverted commas, I used to be in the geeky crowd at school. And then when I was 13, I bumped myself up to the cool crowd. But then I was like the kind of geek in the cool crowd, I guess.
That was me.
Um, but and then we would smoke, and we'd drink in the park. We're again at a small town in Scotland. It's quite standard, especially back then.
Mm.
But there were no rules because I didn't have, so a lot of my friends, but like their parents would say you have to be home by a certain time, and they would have to like make sure that they didn't look like they'd had a drink, but I didn't have to worry about any of that because there wasn't anyone checking up on me or aware at what time I was coming home at,
Yeah.
etc. Not to say that that was all the time, there were some times that she was okay. But yeah, it majorly affected my teenage years because I think when you don't have that discipline around you, you just kind of lets you run wild a little bit. And then if you're in with that kind of crowd that are doing that, I didn't go off the rails, but I was always I'm quite smart. But as I was doing that, I wasn't doing as well in school and things. But it got to a point because I just really was unhappy, in my home and in that town. I think I had this realization just before I sat my, we called them standard grades. I think you called them GCSEs. I don't know what they call them in Australia, but just before I sat those first lot of exams, I was like, right, well, if you want to go to university and you want to get out of here, you need to knuckle down. And that's when I just started to kind of pull back a little bit. I still hung out with my friends, but I started to, study and just stop clowning around in class and just, do the work because at the time I was just like, just so I can get out of here. So, yeah.
You can see how that connection barrier just got, that hole got bigger, can't you? I think you just touched on it about lack of discipline, and that's maybe a big part of today's society why connection is missing, because discipline isn't even there. There's no delayed gratification anymore. Everything's just kind of given to us on a plate. Even the poor families, people with low income, still have no delayed gratification. They're given, I don't know, iPads to keep them busy, and those devices create a bigger disconnect with their families. So your disconnect was the alcohol and you're allowed to stay out all night. But modern day, no one's out anymore. They're all stuck in the bedroom. At least we know where they are, but there's a disconnect still.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah.
How it's the opposite to what it was maybe 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
What's the right answer?
Happy medium.
A happy medium, yeah, just a bit of everything, I suppose. And I say that quite a lot. Too much water will kill us and drown us, but no water will dehydrate us. And same with heat, we burn to death or we freeze to death. And it's the same with everything else, isn't it? I think if we have a balanced way of life, we could live a nice, long, healthy life, I suppose. With that terms of connection, before we move on away from your childhood, what was the connection like with your sister and I suppose the dynamics with her and her mum? Did she see that as well alongside you? Did she live a similar life to you? Join us tomorrow to hear more from today's incredible guests and learn valuable insights to help you lead your own way. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you then.